The final 2 episodes of the Netflix series Stranger Things, 4th season, dropped on Friday night. Viewers will notice that the fantasy role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons has been a part of the show's lore from the start. In fact, D&D got its start right here in southeast Wisconsin. In our Sunday morning spotlight, Frank Healy is with some of the people who are carrying on the legacy of the game's founder.
You can still feel it when you come out here, that this is where it all began.
There are subtle signs of it everywhere in Lake Geneva. At Lake Geneva Games,
You really need to wear like full plate armor and cast lightning bolts.
a group gathers. 20-sided dice in hand to play the first edition of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons that nearly lifelong Lake Geneva resident Gary Gygax mainly wrote himself at his house off Center Street. He passed away in 2008, and his gravestone is in Oak Hill Cemetery. It's often decorated with dice from fans. Every player at the table has old battle stories.
This big barrel of a dwarf coming down this narrow hallway through the rest of the party, and the specter chasing him through everyone, ignoring them all, and slaps me anyways before they manage to kill it, and 2 levels down the drain.
Michael Thompson recalls a game he once played with Gary's son Ernie acting as Dungeon Master. Tonight, the Dungeon Master is Eric Peterson.
You're kind of the guiding light. So you set the scene, the premise, you control all the stuff in the background.
Peterson has Dungeon Mastered or DM'd since he was 13 years old, living on a military base in Germany.
We're using, spent 5.56 shells as miniatures.
Peterson will guide the characters everyone at the table creates themselves. Gnome thieves, dwarf fighters, half-orc barbarians, through a scenario he developed.
Where Bob the dwarf sells rope, and it's all set up like that. Dwarves are very organized and meticulous.
With these mini dice guiding the characters' fates. But what is this game? If you listen to these old news reports,
it's become popular with children anywhere from grammar school on up. Not so with a lot of adults who think it's been connected to a number of suicides and murders.
Or this classic pamphlet, the intense occult training through D&D prepared Debbie to accept the invitation to enter a witch's coven. The game is evil. Jeff Leeson, or Duck, is head curator at the Dungeon Hobby Shop Museum that's dedicated to TSR, the company Gary helped make to publish the game. Duck worked there in the 70s.
It was a Saturday. A lady came in and said, came up to me and said, I'm wondering where your magic items are. And I said, well, we have all these miniature lines are all over the place. She says, no, your real magic items.
He showed her around, explaining magic isn't real and no demonic texts were studied to make the game, which is played with commonly available math dice. He called Gary right when she left.
One of the coolest things Gary ever said is, you did an excellent job, Duck.
Duck has an immense reverence for the building that once housed TSR.
So I refer to this as the second holiest spot in the gaming world, and then the holiest is 330 Center Street, where Gary wrote the game.
Duck says before Gary created the game, he was a cobbler, a normal blue-collar kind of guy no one would suspect would change the world. But Gary did.
Because if it weren't for D&D, Dungeons & Dragons, all computer games would be different. Right now you have hit points, bosses, levels, that's all TSR.
Now Duck helps protect the legacy of the original D&D manuals, dice sets, literature, art, and copies of the game put together by the Gygax family themselves.
So the whole family actually touched those as they collated them.
TSR eventually fell on hard times and was sold to another company that eventually published 3rd, 4th, and 5th editions of the game that millions play to this day. It's about a lot more than just acting out fantasy medieval combat, magic spells, and tales of heroism on paper for those who play, however.
When I fell in love with this stuff and had all of those friends and developed those relationships, I want that for him. I want that for my son and my daughter.
Joe Ogura has played since he was a kid. Now he plays with his 13-year-old son, Ian.
It's really cool having like a family member being able to play games with you that you can just like family bond with.
Dungeon Master Peterson says the game is about your characters working together as a team to solve problems any way possible through combat, wit, conversation, and teamwork.
The game is probably the single best tool that I've ever seen to initiate the ability to socialize with people and to cooperate with people.
The game has become a community, one so big that even the biggest TV shows reference it. The estimated 40 million people who play continue to share Dungeons & Dragons with people of all ages.
If you're ever unsure about whether you should pick up some dice, roll a character, and play, just do it, give it a try.
Something they all thank Gary Gygax for.
An unbelievable administrator of story. The way that he would plot out any kind of game or anything else he was doing. He's one of those types of guys, though, that never forgot his roots.
Gary's son, Luke Gygax, says his father was, of course, a dad, but also a close friend who shared his love of gaming with him.
I've made it sort of my mission here to carry on his legacy, make sure he is not forgotten, and to promote the things that he loved and believed in so much, which is how you can form friendships and come together around the gaming table